This is Tanvir Mohammed Masood, in this edition of Travel and Events. I'm going to take the opportunity of the current G20 summit, which is basically underway at the moment, and I'm going to speak on this very subject of G20 group of nations. Now, this year's G20 summit is basically gone on to be hosted out there in Australia, and Australia is basically hosting this G20 ceremony. And G20 is basically one such summit of 19 group of nations, along with the European group of nations, where economic ties, economic issues, economic problems, and economic integrities of all the partner nations are discussed and are basically brought to a common term, to the common table, so that each and every issue relating to the economic development and growth of each and every country is basically put forth, and each and every issue is basically discussed at length and breadth. So this is one such platform where we can basically expect some sort of economic discussions which are basically of utmost importance these days, given the economic gloom we have been witnessing after 2007 of Lehman Brothers episode out there in the United States. The most important feature of the G20 summit is that it has the participation of countries like Indonesia and Saudi Arabia, the most predominant and one of the two most powerful Muslim nations of the world, and it's quite heartening. It's a silver lining that these two nations are basically actively participating in this G20 summit these days, and it basically goes on to show that there is this new doors of economic opportunities being opened, not only for the Arab nations but also for non-Arab nations as well, because of the fact that Indonesian and Saudi Arabian economy are pretty different from other economies of the world, since there is a little concept, or rather no concept of interest involved in Saudi Arabian economy for that matter. And for this reason, this G20 summit becomes all the more important and all the more significant. Apart from Saudi Arabia and Indonesia, Argentina is another South American country that is basically one of the partner countries, and it's basically expected that no matter there is no participation of any major American league in this G20 summit, it's quite expected that American issues or American economic problems might also be put forth, and it can be discussed at length and breadth. The most important feature of this G20 summit is the fact that it involves the participation of financial honchos of all the participating countries, financial honchos from the central bank, the governors of central banks of all the participating nations basically participate in this G20 summit, apart from the fact that there are finance ministers as well, and other financial go on to put forth their opinion, their thoughts and insights relating to the economic scenario that is basically prevailing in their country, in their nation. Measures, steps, and initiatives taken in this G20 summit is indeed one of the most important measures towards economic well-being of every developing and developed nation and every partner nation of this G20 summit, since this G20 summit is not any ordinary summit where initiatives and discussions can basically be kept to the back burner. It is one of those summits that which basically involves initiatives to be taken, and that initiative is needed to be implemented as well, and it is always needed to ensure that the implementation process is basically through as quickly as possible without any delay, because that might jeopardize the actual existence of this great summit, of this great institution of economic development. Issues such as national income, GDP, personal income, standard of living, other economic nitty-gritties are basically discussed in this summit, and every nation gets the opportunity to ensure that that particular nation gets assistance from the other nation, for the other partner nation, so that the spirit of this summit, of this platform, is basically adhered, and it's basically the job of every participating nation to make sure that any struggling economy, any economy which is in doom or any sort of trouble and which requires any assistance, this is that their job to make sure that the required assistance is passed on to that struggling economy. After 2007 and 2008 economic boom that basically saw Lehman Brothers of America getting to the doom, basically created a lot of furor all over the world. Economic furor was in there, and at the same time there were other repercussions that took place as a result of such a economic disaster out there. So after that, G20 came into existence. In fact, it was into existence prior to that, but G20 summit and G20 institution as a whole gave a real boon to the struggling economy all over the world, not only in the United States, but other part of the world as well, who are basically partner in this G20 group of nations. If we talk of G20 group of nations, we can indeed make a mention of Indonesia as one of those nations that has really come of age as far as their GDP is concerned, as far as the standard of living and national income is concerned. It is indeed on par with developing country like India and even like Australia. If I could say that investors these days are basically showing more enthusiasm and more willingness and readiness to invest in Indonesia than any other countries in the world. Given the situation, the economic and political situation that is prevailing in India, and the smooth political scenario out there, basically gives a breeding ground for good economic harvest, and which in turn has created a real good climate for investment from outsiders, and investors are basically finding a good ground to invest out there in Indonesia. Indonesia is one such country that had literally threatened one of the major economic power of the world. In fact, it had basically gone on to surpass India, and in fact had literally threatened the membership of this country, and gone on to basically ensure that their membership is ensured at the cost of the Indian membership in the BRIC group of nations, which is basically one such nation that looks into the economic development in Brazil and other such parts of the world. So basically, Indonesia is one such country, and is one such G20 partner that is basically showing a lot of economic promises and economic opportunities. And given the current GDP and the current national income that it has at the moment, it is an ad ground for investment for investors all over the world. Australia is another promising nation, an active member of G20 summit, as also is India, which is basically another great investor all over the world, and it's basically one such a member that has time and again shown a lot of perseverance and a lot of sustenance and in fighting any sort of economic disaster or any sort of economic gloom, as has other G20 partners shown these days.